From the Caves and Jungles of Hindustan, the classic narrative by Madame Blavatsky, God's Warrior. The direction of our pilgrimage of self-improvement lay towards the northwest, as was previously decided. We were very impatient to see these status in statue of Anglo-India, but, do what you may, there always will be a but. We left the Jubalpur line several miles from Nasik, and to return to it, we had to go back to Akbarpur, then travel by doubtful local board roads to the station Vanavad, and take the train of Holkar's line, which joins the Great Indian Peninsula Railway. Meanwhile, the Bagh Caves were quite close to us, not more than 50 miles off, to the east from Mandu. We were undecided whether to leave them alone or go back to the Nirbuda. In the country situated on the other side of Khandesh, our Babu had some chums, as everywhere else in India. The omnipresent Bengali Babus, who are always glad to be of some service to you, are scattered all over Hindustan, like the Jews in Russia. Besides, our party was joined by a new member. The day before we had received a letter from Swami Dayanand, carried to us by a travelling sannyasi. Dayanand informed us that the cholera was increasing every day in Hardwar, and that we must postpone making his acquaintance personally till the end of May, either in Dehradun, at the foot of Himalaya, or in Saharanpur, which attracts every tourist by its charming situation. The sannyasi brought us also a nosegay from the Swami, a nosegay of the most extraordinary flowers, which are totally unknown in Europe. They grow only in certain Himalayan valleys. They possess the wonderful capacity of changing their colour after midday, and do not look dead even when faded. The Latin name of this charming plant is Hibiscus mutabilis. At night they are nothing but a large knot of pressed green leaves, but from dawn till 10 o'clock the flowers open and look like large snow-white roses. Then, towards 12 o'clock, they begin to redden, and later in the afternoon they look as crimson as a peony. These flowers are sacred to the Asuras, a kind of fallen angels in Hindu mythology, and to the sun god Surya. The latter deity fell in love with an Asuri at the beginning of creation, and since then is constantly caught whispering words of fiery love to the flower that shelters her. But the Asura is a virgin. She gives herself entirely to the service of the goddess Chastity, who is the patroness of all the ascetic brotherhoods. The love of Surya is vain. Asura will not listen to him. But under the flaming arrows of the enamoured god she blushes, and in appearance loses her purity. The natives call this plant Lajalu, the modest one. We were spending the night by a brook, under a shadowy fig tree. The sannyasi, who had made a wide circuit to fulfill Dayanand's request, made friends with us, and we sat up late in the night, listening whilst he talked about his travels, the wonders of his native country, once so great, and about the heroic deeds of old Runjit Singh, the lion of the Punjab. Strange, mysterious beings are found sometimes amongst these travelling monks. Some of them are very learned, read and talk Sanskrit, know all about modern science and politics, and nevertheless remain faithful to their ancient philosophical conceptions. Generally, they do not wear any clothes, except a piece of muslin round the loins, which is insisted upon by the police of the towns inhabited by Europeans. They wander from the age of 15 all their lives and die generally very aged. They live never giving a thought to the morrow like the birds of heaven and the lilies of the field. They never touch money and are contented with a handful of rice. All their worldly possessions consist of a small dry pumpkin to carry water, a rosary, a brass cup and a walking stick. The sannyasis and the swamis are usually Sikhs from the Punjab and monotheists. They despise idol worshippers and have nothing to do with them, though the latter very often call themselves by their names. Our new friend was a native of Amritsar, in the Punjab, and had been brought up in the Golden Temple, on the banks of Amritasaras, the Lake of Immortality. The head guru or instructor of Sikhs resides there. He never crosses the boundaries of the temple. His chief occupation is the study of the book called Adigrantha, which belongs to the sacred literature of this strange, bellicose sect. The Sikhs respect him as much as the Tibetans respect their Dalai Lama. The Lamas in general consider the latter to be the incarnation of Buddha. The Sikhs think that the Mahaguru of Amritsar is the incarnation of Nanak, the founder of their sect. Nevertheless, no true Sikh will ever say that Nanak was a deity. They look on him as a prophet, inspired by the spirit of the only God. This shows that our sannyasi was not one of the naked travelling monks, but a true Akali, one of the 600 warrior priests attached to the Golden Temple for the purpose of serving God and protecting the temple from the destructive Musulmans. His name was Ram Ranjit Das, and his personal appearance was in perfect accordance with his title of God's warrior. His exterior was very remarkable and typical, and he looked like a muscular centurion of ancient Roman legions, rather than a peaceable servant of the altar. Ram Ranjit Das appeared to us mounted on a magnificent horse, and accompanied by another Sikh, who respectfully walked some distance behind him, and was evidently passing through his novitiate. Our Hindu companions had discerned that he was an Akali when he was still in the distance. He wore a bright blue tunic without sleeves, exactly like that we see on the statues of Roman warriors. Broad steel bracelets protected his strong arms, and a shield protruded from behind his back. A blue conical turban covered his head, and round his waist were many steel circlets. The enemies of the Sikhs assert that these sacred sectarian belts become more dangerous in the hand of an experienced God's warrior than any other weapon. The Sikhs are the bravest and the most warlike sect of the whole Punjab. The word Sikh means disciple. Founded in the 15th century by the wealthy and noble Brahman Nanak, the new teaching spread so successfully amongst the northern soldiers that in 1539 AD, when the founder died, it counted 100,000 followers. At the present time, this sect, harmonizing closely with the fiery natural mysticism and the warlike tendencies of the natives, is the reigning creed of the whole Punjab. It is based on the principles of theocratic rule, but its dogmas are almost totally unknown to Europeans. The teachings, the religious conceptions, and the rites of the Sikhs are kept secret. The following details are known generally. The Sikhs are ardent monotheists. They refuse to recognize caste, have no restrictions in diet like Europeans, and bury their dead, which, except among Mussulmans, is a rare exception in India. The second volume of the Adigrantha teaches them to adore the only true God, to avoid superstitions, to help the dead, that they may lead a righteous life, and to earn one's living, sword in hand. Govinda, one of the great gurus of the Sikhs, ordered them never to shave their beards and moustaches and not to cut their hair, in order that they may not be mistaken for Mussulmans or any other native of India. Many a desperate battle the Sikhs fought and won against the Mussulmans and against the Hindus. Their leader, the celebrated Ranjit Singh, after having been acknowledged the autocrat of the Upper Punjab, concluded a treaty with Lord Auckland at the beginning of this century, in which his country was proclaimed an independent state. But after the death of the old lion, his throne became the cause of the most dreadful civil wars and disorders. His son, Maharaja Dulip Singh, proved quite unfit for the high post he inherited from his father, and under him, the Sikhs became an ill-disciplined, restless mob. Their attempt to conquer the whole of Hindustan proved disastrous. Persecuted by his own soldiers, Dulip Singh sought the help of Englishmen and was sent away to Scotland. And some time after this, the Sikhs took their place amongst the rest of Britain's Indian subjects. But still there remains a strong body of the great Sikh sect of old. The Cooks represent the most dangerous underground current of the popular hatred. This new sect was founded about 30 years ago, written in 1879, by Balakarama, and at first formed a bulk of people near Attock in the Punjab, on the east bank of the Indus, exactly on the spot where the latter becomes navigable. Balakarama had a double aim: to restore the religion of the Sikhs to its pristine purity, and to organize a secret political body which must be ready for everything at a moment's notice. This brotherhood consists of 60,000 members, who pledged themselves never to reveal their secrets and never to disobey any order of their leaders. In Attock they are few, for the town is small, but we were assured that the Cooks live everywhere in India. Their community is so perfectly organized that it is impossible to find them out or to learn the names of their leaders. In the course of the evening, our Akali presented us with a little crystal bottle filled with water from the Lake of Immortality. He said that a drop of it would cure all diseases of the eye. There are numbers of fresh springs at the bottom of this lake, and so its water is wonderfully pure and transparent, in spite of hundreds of people daily bathing in it. When, later on, we visited it, we had the opportunity to verify the fact that the smallest stone at the bottom is seen perfectly distinctly, all over the 150 square yards of the lake. Amritasaran is the most charming of all the sights of northern India. The reflection of the golden temple in its crystal waters makes a picture that is simply féerique. We had still 7 weeks at our disposal. We were undecided between exploring the Bombay Presidency, the Northwest Provinces, and the Rajasthan. Which were we to choose? Where were we to go? How best to employ our time? Before such a variety of interesting places, we became irresolute. Hyderabad, which is said to transport the tourists into the scenery of the Arabian Nights, seemed so attractive that we seriously thought of turning our elephants back to the territory of the Nizam. We grew fond of the idea of visiting this city of the lion, which was built in 1589 by the magnificent Muhammad Quli Quth Shah, who was so used to luxuries of every kind as to grow weary even of Golconda, with all its fairyland castles and bright gardens. Some buildings of Hyderabad, mere remnants of the past glory, are still known to renown. Mir Abu Talib, the keeper of the royal treasury, states that Muhammad Quli Shah spent the fabulous sum of £2,800,000 sterling on the embellishment of the town at the beginning of his reign, though the labour of the workmen did not cost him anything at all. Save these few memorials of greatness, the town looks like a heap of rubbish nowadays. But all tourists are unanimous on one point, namely, that the British Residency of Hyderabad still deserves its title of the Versailles of India. The title the British Residency bears, and everything it may contain at the present time, are mere trifles compared with the past. I remember reading a chapter of the history of Hyderabad by an English author, which contained something to the following effect. Whilst the resident entertained the gentleman, his wife was similarly employed receiving the ladies a few yards off in a separate palace, which was as sumptuous and bore the name of Rang Mahal. Both palaces were built by Colonel Kirkpatrick, the late minister at the Nizam's court. Having married a native princess, he constructed this charming abode for her personal use. Its garden is surrounded by a high wall, as is customary in the Orient, and the centre of the garden is adorned with a large marble fountain, covered with scenes from the Ramayana, and mosaics, pavilions, galleries, and terraces. Everything in this garden is loaded with adornments of the most costly Oriental style, that is to say, with abundance of inlaid designs, paintings, gilding, ivory, and marble. The great attraction of Mrs. Kirkpatrick's receptions were the Nautches, magnificently dressed, thanks to the generosity of the resident. Some of them wore a cargo of jewels worth £30,000, and literally shone from head to foot with diamonds and other precious stones. The glorious times of the East India Company are beyond recall, and no residents, and even no native princes, could now afford to be so generous. India, this most precious diamond of the British crown, is utterly exhausted, like a pile of gold in the hands of an alchemist, who thriftlessly spent it in the hope of finding the philosopher's stone. Besides ruining themselves and the country, the Anglo-Indians commit the greatest blunders, at least in 2 points of their present government system. These 2 points are, first, the Western education they give to the higher classes, and secondly, the protection and maintenance of the rites of idol worship. Neither of these systems is wise. By means of the first, they successfully replace the religious feelings of old India, which, however false, had the great advantage of being sincere, by a positive atheism amongst the young generation of the Brahmins. and by the means of the second they flatter only the ignorant masses, from whom nothing is to be feared under any circumstances. If the patriotic feelings of the bulk of the population could possibly be roused, the English would have been slaughtered long ago. The rural populace is unarmed, it is true, but a crowd seeking revenge could use the brass and stone idols sent to India by thousands from Birmingham, with as great success as if they were so many swords. But as it is, the masses of India are indifferent and harmless, so that the only existing danger comes from the side of the educated classes. And the English fail to see that the better the education they give them, the more careful they must be to avoid reopening the old wounds, always alive to new injury, in the heart of every true Hindu. The Hindus are proud of the past of their country. Dreams of past glories are their only compensation for the bitter present. The English education they receive only enables them to learn that Europe was plunged in the darkness of the Stone Age, when India was in the full growth of her splendid civilization. And so the comparison of their past with their present is only the more sad. This consideration never hinders the Anglo-Indians from hurting the feelings of the Hindus. For instance, in the unanimous opinion of travellers and antiquarians, the most interesting building of Hyderabad is Chahar Minar, a college that was built by Muhammad Quli Khan on the ruins of a still more ancient college. It is built at the crossing of 4 streets, on 4 arches, which are so high that loaded camels and elephants with their turrets pass through freely. Over these arches rise the several stories of the college. Each story once was destined for a separate branch of learning. Alas, the times when India studied philosophy and astronomy at the feet of her great sages are gone, and the English have transformed the college itself into a warehouse. The hall, which served for the study of astronomy and was filled with quaint medieval apparatus, is now used for a depot of opium. And the hall of philosophy contains huge boxes of liqueurs, rum and champagne, which are prohibited by the Quran, as well as by the Brahmins. We were so enchanted by what we heard about Hyderabad that we resolved to start thither the very next morning, when our cicerone and companions destroyed all our plans by a single word. This word was heat. During the hot season in Hyderabad, the thermometer reaches 98 degrees Fahrenheit in the shade, and the temperature of the water in the Indus is the temperature of the blood. As to Upper Sind, where the dryness of the air and the extreme aridity of the sandy soil reproduce the Sahara in miniature, the usual shade temperature is 130 degrees Fahrenheit. No wonder the missionaries have no chance there. The most eloquent of Dante's descriptions of hell could hardly produce anything but a cooling effect on a populace who live perfectly contented under these circumstances. Calculating that there was no obstacle to our going to the Bagh caves, and that going to Sind was a perfect impossibility, we recovered our equanimity. Then the General Council decided that we had better abandon all ideas of a predetermined plan and travel as fancy led us. We dismissed our elephants, and next day, a little before sunset, arrived at the spot where the Vagre and Girna join. These are 2 little rivers, quite famous in the annals of the Indian mythology, and which are generally conspicuous by their absence, especially in summer. At the opposite side of the river, there lay the illustrious Bagh caves, with their 4 openings blinking in the thick evening mist. We thought of crossing to them immediately, by the help of a ferry boat, but our Hindu friends and the boatmen interposed. The former said that visiting these caves is dangerous even by daytime, because all the neighbourhood is full of beasts of prey and of tigers, who, I concluded, are like the Bengali babus, to be met with everywhere in India. Before venturing into these caves, you must send a reconnoitring party of torchbearers and armed shikaris. As to the boatmen, they protested on different grounds, but protested strongly. They said that no Hindu would dare to approach these caves after the sunset. No one but a Balati would fancy that Vagre and Girna are ordinary rivers, for every Hindu knows they are divine spouses, the god Shiva and his wife Parvati. This, in the first instance, and in the second, the Bagh tigers are no ordinary tigers either. The Sahibs are totally mistaken. These tigers are the servants of the sadhus, of the holy miracle workers who have haunted the caves now for many centuries, and who deign sometimes to take the shape of a tiger. And neither the gods, nor the sadhus, nor the glamour, nor the true tigers are fond of being disturbed in their nightly rest. What could we say against all this? We cast one more sorrowful look at the caves and returned to our antediluvian carriages. The Babu and Narayan said we must spend the night at the house of a certain chum of the Babu, who resided in a small town 3 miles further on and bearing the same name as the caves, and we unwillingly acquiesced. Many things in India are wonderful and unintelligible, but one of the most wonderful and the most unintelligible is the geographical and the topographical disposition of the numberless territories of this country. Political conjunctures in India seem to be everlastingly playing the French game casse-tête, changing the pattern, diminishing one part and adding to another. The land that only yesterday belonged to this Raja or that Thakur is sure to be found today in the hands of quite a different set of people. For instance, we were in the Raj of Amgir in Malva, and we were going to the little city of Bagh, which also belongs to Malva and is included in the Amgir Raj. In the documents, Malva is included in the independent possessions of Holkar, and nevertheless, the Amgir Raj does not belong to Tukuji Rao Holkar, but to the son of the independent Raja of Amgir, who was hanged, by inadvertence, as we were assured, in 1857. The city, and the caves of Bagh, very oddly belong to the Maharaja Sindhya of Gwalior, who, besides, does not own them personally, having made a kind of present of them, and their 9,000 rupees of revenue, to some poor relation. This poor relation, in his turn, does not enjoy the property in the least, because a certain Rajput Thakur stole it from him, and will not consent to give it back. Bagh is situated on the road from Gujarat to Malva, in the defile of Udaipur, which is owned accordingly by the Maharana of Udaipur. Bagh itself is built on the top of a woody hillock, and being disputed property does not belong to anyone in particular, properly speaking. But a small fortress and a bazaar in the centre of it are the private possessions of a certain Dani, who, besides being the chieftain of the Bimala tribe, was the personal chum of our Babu, and a great thief and highway robber, according to the assertions of the said Babu. "But why do you intend taking us to the place of a man whom you consider as a thief and a robber?" objected one of us timidly. "He is a thief and a brigand," coolly answered the Bengali, "but only in the political sense. Otherwise he is an excellent man, and the truest of friends. Besides, if he does not help us, we shall starve. The bazaar and everything in the shops belong to him." These explanations of the Babu notwithstanding, we were glad to learn that the chum in question was absent, and we were received by a relation of his. The garden was put at our disposal, and before our tents were pitched, we saw people coming from every side of the garden, bringing us provisions. Having deposited what he had brought, each of them, on leaving the tent, threw over his shoulder a pinch of betel and soft sugar, an offering to the foreign bhutas, which were supposed to accompany us wherever we went. The Hindus of our party asked us, very seriously, not to laugh at this performance, saying it would be dangerous in this out-of-the-way place. No doubt they were right. We were in central India, the very nest of all kinds of superstitions, and were surrounded by Beals. All along the Vindhya ridge, from Yama on the west of the Dead City, the country is thickly populated by this most daring, restless, and superstitious of all the half-savage tribes of India. The Orientalists think that the naive Bills comes from the Sanskrit root pid, which means to separate. Sir J. Malcolm supposes accordingly that the Bills are sectarians, who separated from the Brahmanical creed and were excommunicated. All this looks very probable, but their tribal traditions say something different. Of course, in this case, as in every other, their history is strongly entangled with mythology, and one has to go through a thick shrubbery of fancy before reaching the tribe's genealogical tree. The relation of the absent Dani, who spent the evening with us, told us the following. The Beals are the descendants of one of the sons of Mahadeva, or Shiva, and of a fair woman, with blue eyes and a white face, whom he met in some forest on the other side of the Kalapani, black waters, or ocean. This pair had several sons, one of whom, as handsome as he was vicious, killed the favourite ox of his grandfather Mahadeva, and was banished by his father to the Jodhpur desert. Banished to its remotest southern corner, he married, and soon his descendants filled the whole country. They scattered along the Vindhya ridge, on the western frontier of Malva and Khandesh, and later in the woody wilderness, on the shores of the rivers Maha, Narmada, and Tapti. And all of them, inheriting the beauty of their forefather, his blue eyes and fair complexion, inherited also his turbulent disposition and his vice. "We are thieves and robbers," naively explained the relative of the Babu's chum, "but we can't help it because this is the decree of our mighty forefather, the great Mahadeva Shiva. Sending his grandson to repent his sins in the desert, he said to him, 'Go, wretched murderer of my son and your brother, the ox Nadi. Go and live the life of an exile and a brigand, to be an everlasting warning to your brethren.' These are the very words of the great God. Now do you think we could disobey his orders? The least of our actions is always regulated by our pamyas, chieftains, who are the direct descendants of Nadir Singh, the first Bhil, the child of our exiled ancestor, and being this, it is only natural that the great God speaks to us through him. Is not it strange that Apis, the sacred ox of the Egyptians, is honoured by the followers of Zoroaster, as well as by the Hindus? The ox Nadi, the emblem of life in nature, is the son of the creating Father, or rather his life-giving breath. Ammianus Marcellinus mentions, in one of his works, that there exists a book which gives the exact age of Apis, the clue to the mystery of creation and the cyclic calculations. The Brahmins also explain the allegory of the ox Nadi by the continuation of life on our globe. The mediators between Shiva and the Bhils possess such unrestricted authority that the most awful crimes are accomplished at their lightest word. The tribe have thought it necessary to decrease their power to a certain extent by instituting a kind of council in every village. This council is called Tavi and tries to cool down the hot-headed fancies of the Danis, their brigand lords. However, the word of the Bhils is sacred, and their hospitality is boundless. The history and the annals of the princes of Jodhpur and Udaipur confirm the legend of the Bhil emigration from their primitive desert, but how they happened to be there, nobody knows. Colonel Todd is positive that the Bhils, together with the Mereces and the Goans, are the aborigines of India, as well as the tribes who inhabit the Nerbudda forests. But why the Bhils should be almost fair and blue-eyed, whereas the rest of the hill tribes are almost African in type, is a question that is not answered by this statement. The fact that all these aborigines call themselves Bhumiputra and Vanaputra, sons of the earth and sons of the forest, when the Rajputs, their first conquerors, call themselves Suryavansa and the Brahmans Induputras, descendants of the sun and the moon, does not prove everything. It seems to me that in the present case, their appearance, which confirms their legends, is of much greater value than philology. Dr. Clarke, the author of Travels in Scandinavia, is very logical in saying that, by directing our attention on the traces of the ancient superstitions of a tribe, we shall find out who were its primitive forefathers much more easily than by scientific examination of their tongue. The superstitions are grafted on the very root, whereas the tongue is subjected to all kinds of changes. But unfortunately, everything we know about the history of the Bhils is reduced to the above-mentioned tradition and to a few ancient songs of their bards. These bards or bhattas live in Rajasthan, but visit the Bhils yearly in order not to lose the leading thread of the achievements of their countrymen. Their songs are history, because the bhattas have existed from time immemorial, composing their lays for future generations, for this is their hereditary duty. And the songs of the remotest antiquity point to the lands over the Kalapani as the place whence the Bhils came, that is to say, some place in Europe. Some Orientalists, especially Colonel Todd, seek to prove that the Rajputs, who conquered the Bhils, were newcomers of Scythian origin, and that the Bhils are the true Aborigines. To prove this, they put forward some features common to both peoples, Rajput and Scythian, for instance. 1. The worship of the sword, the lance, the shield, and the horse. 2. The worship of and the sacrifice to the sun, which, as far as I know, never was worshipped by the Scythians. 3. The passion of gambling, which again is as strong amongst the Chinese and the Japanese. 4. The custom of drinking blood out of the skull of an enemy, which is also practiced by some Aborigines of America, etc., etc. I do not intend entering here on a scientific ethnological discussion, and besides, I am sure no one fails to see that the reasoning of scientists sometimes takes a very strange turn when they set to prove some favourite theory of theirs. It is enough to remember how entangled and obscure is the history of the ancient Scythians to abstain from drawing any positive conclusions whatsoever from it. The tribes that go under one general denomination of Scythians were many, and still it is impossible to deny that there is a good deal of similitude between the customs of the old Scandinavians, worshippers of Odin, whose land indeed was occupied by the Scythians more than 500 years BC, and the customs of the Rajputs. But this similitude gives as much right to the Rajputs to say that we are a colony of Surya Vansas settled in the west, as to us to maintain that the Rajputs are the descendants of Scythians who emigrated to the east. The Scythians of Herodotus and the Scythians of Ptolemy, and some other classical writers, are two perfectly distinct nationalities. Under Scythia, Herodotus means the extension of land from the mouth of Danube to the Sea of Azov, according to Niebuhr, and to the mouth of Don, according to Rawlinson, whereas the Scythia of Ptolemy is a country strictly Asiatic, including the whole space between the river Volga and Serica, or China. Besides this, Scythia was divided by the western Himalayas, which the Roman writers call Imaus, into Scythia intra Imaum and Scythia extra Imaum. Given this lack of precision, the Rajputs may be called the Scythians of Asia, and the Scythians the Rajputs of Europe, with the same degree of likelihood. Pinkerton's opinion is that European contempt for the Tartars would not be half so strong if the European public learned how closely we are related to them, that our forefathers came from northern Asia, and that our primitive customs, laws, and mode of living were the same as theirs. In a word, that we are nothing but a Tartar colony. Cimbri, Celts, and Gauls, who conquered the northern part of Europe, are different names of the same tribe, whose origin is Tartary. Who were the Goths, the Swedes, the Vandals, the Huns, and the Franks, if not separate swarms of the same beehive? The annals of Sweden point to Kashgar as the fatherland of the Swedes. The likeness between the languages of the Saxons and the Kipchak Tartars is striking, and the Celtic, which still exists in Brittany and in Wales, is the best proof that their inhabitants are descendants of the Tartar nation. Whatever Pinkerton and others may say, the modern Rajput warriors do not answer in the least the description Hippocrates gives us of the Scythians. The father of medicine says, "The bodily structure of these men is thick, coarse, and stunted. Their joints are weak and flabby. They have almost no hair, and each of them resembles the other. No man, who has seen the handsome, gigantic warriors of Rajasthan, with their abundant hair and beards, will ever recognize this portrait drawn by Hippocrates as theirs. Besides, the Scythians, whoever they may be, buried their dead, which the Rajputs never did, judging by the records of their most ancient MSS. The Scythians were a wandering nation, and are described by Hesiod as living in covered carts and feeding on mare's milk. And the Rajputs have been a sedentary people from time immemorial, inhabiting towns, and having their history at least several hundred years before Christ, that is to say, earlier than the epoch of Herodotus. They do celebrate the Ashvamedha, the horse sacrifice, but will not touch mare's milk, and despise all Mongolians. Herodotus says that the Scythians, who called themselves Skoloti, hated foreigners, and never let any stranger in their country, and the Rajputs are one of the most hospitable peoples of the world. In the epoch of the wars of Darius, 516 BC, the Scythians were still in their own district, about the mouth of the Danube, and at the same epoch the Rajputs were already known in India, and had their own kingdom. As to the Ashvamedha, which Colonel Todd thinks to be the chief illustration of his theory, the custom of killing horses in honor of the sun is mentioned in the Rig Veda, as well as in the Aitareya Brahmana. Martin Haug states that the latter has probably been in existence since 2000 to 2400 BC. But it strikes me that the digression from the Babu's Chum to the Scythians and the Rajputs of the antediluvian epoch threatens to become too long, so I beg the reader's pardon and resume the thread of my narrative.